it's worth noting that one thing I've said before is even though I'm not super young anymore, and we have a recent bullet video which alludes to that, I still feel that when I get really low on time to like 5 seconds or less, even with a 2-second increment, generally I think my split-second decisions are better than most of the other players. Welcome back, everyone. I recently finished playing the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz a couple of days ago. Now, as you know, I did not do a recap at the time. The main reason is I was simply very tired. It was a very long 2 days of Blitz at the end of the event. Additionally, there were closing ceremonies. I had to catch an early morning flight, and I had a couple days off as well with a planned vacation. So without further ado, I'm going to recap the final day that I did play in St. Louis recently. Now, as you know, when I did play the Rapid portion, I finished with 7 points out of potential 18 and dead last place in the Rapid. I had a very good first day in the Blitz. I scored 7.5 points out of 9, and I was 3.5 points out of first place. In third place, half a point behind Maxime Vachier-Lagrotte. So I'm going to pick a couple of games and some critical moments from what happened on that final day. The first couple of games were obviously very critical. First of all, I was starting with double blacks because on the first day of the Blitz, I had double whites against Fabiano and Levon. So of course, to start the second day, I had double blacks against Fabiano and Levon instead of double whites. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into the first game. The first game against Fabiano starts with an English opening. Same opening that I played against Fabiano in both the Rapid and the Blitz. Nothing super exciting in terms of the opening phase of the game. We get the structure here where white plays d3 and g3. Now, one thing that was very interesting to note is, I will show this just very briefly, is that I played this line with d3 and a3 on the the final Rapid day against Fabiano Caruana. And basically the point behind it was very simple. You end up with some sort of position like this, where you end up with a reverse Sicilian, kind of like a Najdorf, except white has an extra tempo here. So I played this in the final day, on the final day of the Rapid portion, and Ali Reza and several other players actually started trying to do the same thing in the Blitz, where they just started playing these Englishes which turn into reverse Sicilians. Like this game against Fabiano, you'll notice that after g3, this is a completely reverse Sicilian, except white has an extra tempo by playing g3 here, versus getting this position where it's black's move, in which case black could simply play, just to illustrate it so you guys see it, I'll make a couple of random moves. You get this position with bishop g4, and now we have a classic Sicilian here. This is either a rouser or the classical variation with the colors reversed. However, it is white's move, so it's a little bit different, but nonetheless, this theme of playing these reverse Sicilians was very common in the Blitz portion of the event. So anyway, the game goes on. It was not a very clear-cut game. It was pretty balanced most of the way through. I was maybe a little bit better for some portions, but we'll get to some critical moments in this game. So we get to a position like this. Already, I think black's a little bit better. It's easier to play. White has double pawns. You can play like c5, no central pawn breaks, and additionally, long-term, this pawn at a4 should be weak, and maybe the knight can even jump to a square like e3. Game goes on with queen c2, queen e3, king h1. Now here I played queen c5. Evidently, computer says g6, and black is clearly better. Of course, not an obvious move at all, and the game goes on. They get this critical position right around here, and black is much better here. But in this position, one thing that I did not understand during the game is that white has a very simple plan. He wants to get the knight to either e3 or c3 and jump to d5, because the pawns on e4 and c4 cover this critical square. So I go knight c6, he goes knight e2, and now here I played knight b4, completely missing this idea of knight f1, knight e3. What I should have done in this position was probably place a move like queen d7, and if white goes knight f1 here, I think queen d4 is supposed to be very strong. Additionally, even something like knight d4 here, and it feels like after queen d1 f5, black is again doing very well. I completely overlooked this idea, so I play knight b4. Game goes on, and right around knight f1, I suddenly realized that there was danger lurking. So white can get this knight to e3 and d5. White could potentially be better. Of course, the irony is that the computer just laughs at me for thinking that way. And it says that after a move like queen d6, white cannot play knight e3, because then you have queen d4, and it's a very unusual pin here. But of course, in a blitz game, time running down, not obvious whatsoever. So in this position, I play f5 instead. We trade on f5, queen c3, important move. By the way, it's worth noting that during the game, Fabiano came very close to playing knight e3. He went to grab the knight, and he was going to play knight e3. Unfortunately for me, he did realize if he plays knight e3, it's puzzle rush 101. I can play bishop takes d3, pawn takes bishop, rook takes pawn, and now white's going to either lose the queen or the knight in this position, and black will be ahead by several pawns. Fabiano was able to catch himself before he blundered, so the game went on with queen c3, bishop d7, rook a1, and now I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds here. We reach this end game where I'm probably a little bit worse. I don't want to say losing. Again, in a blitz game, anything can happen, but white probably should not lose this game. So we get this critical position after king f8, rook e4, bishop f5, rook f4, king g7, and now the show goes on. I play h6, h4, rook f8, and at this point in the game, this should be a draw with correct play. White should not lose this game if he plays a move like bishop f3, or he just keeps it very stable. Instead, the show goes on, knight f6, bishop a4, we get king g1, king f7, g5. Of course, white wants to create both the weakness on g6 because the bishop can target it. Additionally, it plants the knight on f6. So knight a2, bishop d5, king g7, king f2, knight c3. Position's very dry. Of course, we're both fairly low on time here. Now, it's worth noting that one thing I've said before is even though I'm not super young anymore, and we have a recent bullet video which alludes to that, I still feel that when I get really low on time to like 5 seconds or less, even with a 2-second increment, generally I think my split-second decisions are better than most of the other players. So the game goes on. Basically Fabiano allows me to get king f5. Now this should still be a draw here at this point, but what happens? Yes, we get this. I go c4 takes, and now after king f2, king f4, I'm winning this pawn on g5, and it's very hard for white to play. Fabiano plays bishop f3. I take on g5. He plays knight e4. If I were to trade the knights, this should be not king f4, sorry, even king f6. This should be a draw after e3 here. White should be able to save the game. But of course I go king f4, not trading the knights. We get knight d2, knight d1, and knight e3 here. Fabiano finds bishop b7. Very strong move to create this nice square for the knight on f3. Again, if pawns ever come off the board, for example, this would be an easy draw because white can always sack either the knight for the pawn, or even, for example, back this you got an endgame like this where it's a bishop and knight versus knight. Both of those endgames would be a draw. So Fabiano can get the pawn trade. He will save the game. So I play bishop d5, Fabiano trades, and now he makes a fatal blunder. He plays king f2, which isn't the blunder. I go knight c3, knight f3, knight e4, and now he makes a fatal blunder with king e1 here. If he had played king g2, this would have been a draw because I have to go king e3 here, and now white has this very annoying move knight h4, attacking the pawn on g6. If I played g5, knight f5 takes, of course this will be a draw. And if I take on e2, knight g6, if I do go d3 here, white has knight f4 check with the fork, and after king e3, knight takes d3, it's a draw. And if I play king e3, knight e5, it stops the pawn push, again should be a draw. Fabiano plays king e1, which now blunders this very nasty d3 move because if white takes the pawn, after king takes knight, pawn takes knight, king takes pawn, king f2, king f4, king g2, king g4. White must yield here, and after king f2, king h3, king f3, g5, king f2, g4, king g1, king g3, h1 f2, h2 g3. The pawn is getting through to make a queen, and I will win the game. So after d3, it's all over. Fabiano does play knight d4 with 1 second on the clock. I play d2, king d1, g5, and here Fabiano flags right before he plays knight f3. Now again, as I said before, the start of blitz days tends to be very important. Doesn't matter whether it's an event like the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, World Rapid and Blitz, whatever event it is. In blitz in particular, you really need to get off to a good start because the problem is with games happening every, say, 30 minutes or even less in some cases, if you don't get off to a good start, it's sort of very momentum based and it's very easy to lose control. So I won this first game, which was very important. I believe that Ali Reza also won his game, so I was still 3.5 points out of first place, but Maxime drew his game, so I was tied for second. So now we're going to move on to the second game. Now this is the game that I played against Levon Aronian with the black piece. As I said, starts and sort of the trends are very important. So this game starts with e4. I play e5. We go into this Berlin endgame here with queens off the board. Now I'm not going to go through this game super in depth. We'll just get to a couple of critical moments. So white is probably a little bit better here, not super clear. Now here I played c5 here, which is not best. After knight e7, black should be completely fine, but in a blitz game, kind of hard to play. So I go c5, rook d1, bishop e6. Game goes on. Knight f4. I played bishop c8, which is a big mistake. Rook d8, and now e6. Very strong moves by Levon. Now it's worth noting that right around this point in the game, I play knight g6, and right here, at this point in the game, I believe I had about a minute 15 on the clock, starting with 5 minutes, and Levon had about 3.5 minutes. So at this point, white is up a pawn and completely winning. First of all, black also has a problem that you've double pawns, so it's more like white is up just 2 free pawns on the king side with a 3 versus 1, and white should win this without any difficulty. Now, if I had lost this game the way that I should lose here, probably it would not have been that big of a deal. But the thing that's really sad about this game and why sort of swings happen is that in this game, what happens is that Levon decides to go for something a little bit weird here, and we get this end game here with rook f4, rook a4, c3, takes, dc5, b5. Now, as you can tell, computer actually doesn't think that white is winning here. That being said, in a pawn race here, it is easier for white to play because white has a clear path with pawns, and I can't just win this pawn on c5 right away. well, I guess I could with king c6, but you just feel like it's a little bit too slow. Say h4 and g5. This somehow just feels too slow here. Now computer of course laughs at me and it says, what are you thinking? It's obviously zeros. Black draws quite comfortably. Not so easy in a blitz game, because it feels like at this point when you look at this end game, this pawn is really critical, and it feels like you don't necessarily have time to just come up and capture the pawn with the king. That being said, I did have this chance. So when we go back to this position right here already, taking on a4 is completely insane by Levon, but we get to this critical moment, and I play rook d5, rook e4, takes f4 here, rook c1, and now I go rook c2, and I finally play c5, trying to force the pawns up the board. Now Levon plays f5, rook c1, f6, I check, and then I play here, and Levon got low on time and he blundered with this. Well, blunder is maybe too strong a word, but he plays rook f4. If white goes g5 here after takes b3, rook e2, c4, g6, or sorry, not g6, sorry, rook b2 here, white is completely winning because I cannot push the c pawn because then he captures with check. If I move the king up, it still does nothing because I still can't push the pawn without losing the b3 pawn, and this is just game over. Now Levon also spent a bit of time here, probably was worried that maybe he would miscalculate something in the pawn race, so he plays rook f4, and now I'm able to trade. And at this point white is still better here. We get to a queen ending right here, and we get this point to this point. Now this position should be a draw with correct play. To be clear, computer says it's zeros. I felt during the game it should be a draw if I don't do anything crazy, but with limited time on the clock I was unable to save this. I go here, and apparently this is still a draw. Let's see why. Apparently here I'm supposed to play king b4, because if he goes queen h5 I can play queen e3, and there's some kind of triangle. Don't ask me what it is, but I guess this is still a draw. Again, very tough to play with seconds on the clock. At any rate, I end up losing the pawn, and Levon shows some flawless technique as I go on to lose this endgame. Just to show you guys the final position here, I get the check, he blocks, goes here, no checks. By the way, the queen covers all the checks on the e file. It also covers the c5 square, and I mean, maybe I have queen h4 here as well, which I actually didn't see at the time, but after queen f6, queen b4, I believe the king e8, I'm not sure exactly how white wins this, but it is winning as you can see from the bar. So I go queen g2, and eventually Levon's able to get a second queen, and sadly there's no stalemate. I could throw in a check, but I still have one lone square on c6, which I can go to with the king. There are no funny queen sacks, and any other check like f5 or f4, he just blocks with a check, and that's game over. So I lose the second game. Now the reason I bring up this game is not specifically about the loss, but it's about the way I lost this game. As I said at very early on in this game, I should have simply lost this game very cleanly. We get to this position right here. If I lose this game, Levon plays just good classic technical moves here and wins this game with no counterplay, I'm probably unhappy with the game, but it doesn't have the ability to tilt me the way that it actually did. But the fact that Levon misplayed this and let me back into the game to where I should have drawn the game and then I blundered at the end, it's very tilting, because you feel like Levon let me all the way back from being completely lost to where it's a draw, and then I still couldn't quite find the right moves at the end, and because of that, that's very tilty. So moving on to the third game of the Rapid and Blitz final day, which I played against against Alireza Firouzja. You have to note my mindset. Now the irony of this tournament, looking at the overall standings and the overall result, is that the two probably moments that I wish I could take back and change, even though they don't change the outcome of the tournament, make no mistake about that, Alireza, very deserving winner. It's probably both games against Alireza. First one would be the second round of the Rapid against him after losing to Lenny. Now after losing a very tough game to Lenny, in my mind I thought I should potentially try to slow it down. He was playing the Berlin, so there were chances where I could have made one of those infamous Berlin draws or something along those lines and slowed it way down. I did not do that. I lost that game. Alireza, as I said, played a very good game. We mentioned it in our recap. And the other moment was this moment. So after winning the first game against Fabiano, then I lose the second game to Levon where I was completely lost. Then Levon gives me this miracle chance to save it. Unfortunately, I still lose, so I'm a little bit on a tilt here. I wasn't sure what to do. Now initially I thought, well, you know what, I'm only 4 points out of first place. If I win this game, maybe I can get to first. That was in my mind in terms of what I was thinking. Now as we know, that was very foolhardy to have such thoughts. There was no way I was going to catch him, so I probably should have slowed it down, but I chose not to. Instead I played my classic knight f3 e3 b3 setup. Now what I did not expect was for Alireza to be very well prepared. One thing you guys probably will have seen from the RCC and other events is that I have played this line quite frequently with the white pieces, most recently in the RCC final against Dmitry Andreikin. I believe Vladimir Fedoseev also essayed this against me a couple weeks back. Again, I was not expecting Alireza to be super prepared, and I responded very poorly here. We won't go through this game in depth. We get this position right around here. bishop d3, bishop f5, and now I play b4. Now this was b4 is not the only moment, but b4, queen g6 is played. Now at this moment already here, I was already considering taking, but I decided to go b4, and now here I really felt like I should take this knight. If he takes with the pawn, I can play something like rook c1, for example, or even something like h4, and after bishop g4, queen b2 here, let's say bishop f3, I can go rook c1, queen g4, king h2. My king is actually very, very safe here on h2, and there are no issues whatsoever. Eventually what should happen is something like b6, we trade, I go rook c1, and with the opposite color bishops, it should end in a draw. But at this point already here, I was like, you know what, I still could not bring myself to be like, okay, just make the draw, don't take that risk. So instead I play rook c1, rook d1, which is a mistake. There's knight g5 here, and now I completely lose my mind. I play this f4 move, overlooking something very, very basic here. In fact, I even spent 2 minutes on this move, which makes it much worse. Which after takes knight f3. Initially I was gonna go, I think I was gonna go king f2 here. This was my initial idea, and I thought, well, he has to trade. If knight h2, I can play something like bishop c5, rook d8, rook d1, and I should be okay here. I don't know if it's necessarily whether I'm drawing or not. Maybe I'm still a little bit worse, but I thought I would have adequate counterplay. But then as soon as Alireza played bishop takes e3, I suddenly realized that if I play king f2, there's this rook c2 move, and if I take, there's a very nice checkmate with queen h5, g4, and queen h3. And if I go king h1, which is another idea, there's still rook c2, and after I take, there's a classic Arabian checkmate with the knight and the rook. It's also very, very beautiful. I don't think I can actually stop me, but if I take the rook, he obviously takes, and it's the same thing, and this would have been very nice. So I'm all flustered here, and I play king g2, which is just a blunder on the spot. Now amazingly, Alireza does not play the line that is winning. Now I suspect in his mind he probably was expecting king f2, and so when he was thinking for like the 30 seconds or whatever it was, he's just like, okay, I mean I just checked. Now after king g2, there actually is an on the spot win with knight e1 check, creating a fork, and after rook takes knight, queen takes queen, it's game over, c'est la vie, that's it. Alireza would play rook c2, and unfortunately, despite that slight mistake here, I got to this position where I was down a queen, where I have a rook and a bishop for a queen and a pawn. I was not able to save it. I don't think it was ever savable, so I lose a second game in a row. So now after 2 games in a row, and we don't need to go through the rest of this game, it's pretty straightforward. So now after 2 losses in a row, I'm now sitting, I think, 1 point out of second place. I'm in a very, very bad mood after 2 losses in a row, because I knew that when I played Alireza, in my mind, I knew that I should slow it down. I didn't do that. I lose the second game. And in Blitz in particular, momentum is really important, so you don't want to end up with a big swing. A big swing on the plus side is great. You win like 5-6 games, it's amazing, but you really want to try to stop the bleeding on when you're not doing well at like 1, maximum 2 games. So this 4th game after losing 2 in a row, I'm playing Sam Shanklin, my good friend, and I decide here to play the modern defense. I decide, you know what, I'm 1 point out of second place. I'm not playing well. I can't play e5 and potentially draw a game here if I want to have any shot at second place. So I go all in here by playing this classic tiger variation of the modern / Pirc with this d6, g6, a6, queen d2, b5, f3, knight d7, h4, knight f6, castles, knight b6, bishop h6. Now, one thing that people oftentimes wonder about these games that I play online is they think, well, you know, you play the moderns, you play a lot of these questionable or slightly dubious openings, and you seem to do very well with them. Now, it is true that I do very well with these games in Blitz Online in particular, but when you start playing it in Rapid and Classical, the problem is that they're a little bit dubious. You end up with these positions where you're significantly worse. And even though someone might not be able to prove that in a Blitz game, I do feel that in a classical game, if I had this position against Sam, for example, he would have blown me away. He would have just blown me off the board. At any rate, I play bishop f8. The show goes on. Play h5. And now he actually makes a mistake here by playing f4, because now after d5, we got the classic flying V formation here. Pawns from f7 to h5 and f7 to d5, and also I can even play c5 and rook c8 and put pressure on the queen side. So it's a very easy position to play for black, and I felt very good during the game we got here. Now the game itself, Sam would defend very, very well for quite a while, even though it looks like black is doing very well here. The problem is that white can just put the rook on c1, and he also has a great knight on d4, and if this king could magically be like on g7, it might be easier to play in certain circumstances. But it's going to be very, very hard here with this king and these pawns on b5 and a6 to not walk into something. If I try to play a b4, say I play b4 at some point, that a6 is hanging here. Let's say takes. If I take the knight, I believe that white can go bishop takes a6 here, winning the queen on d4. And I also can't ever really push a5 because then I hang the b5 pawn. So the pawns are stuck here. He can very easily double stack on the c file with guard the c3 pawn, and it's not easy to play. but you know, you just keep playing on. So I go queen e7, bunch of moves. We do a lot of maneuvering here. Nothing actually changes in the position. But Sam in the process is getting low on time here as we keep maneuvering all over the board. And finally we get to this critical moment right about here where he plays queen e3. Now again, even here, I think after a move like queen d2 or queen b2 with rook c1, white is worse, but it's not all that dangerous. At any rate, he goes back. I go knight b8 here, which apparently is a blunder because of knight g5, which I didn't even see, and doesn't even feel very human, honestly. Goes rook c1, I take, he plays queen d2, and now here I play b4, which is a very strange move. Actually, it's very weird looking at this with an engine, because it thinks that I can just take, and after rook c1, king b2, knight c5 is simply winning. And I didn't even consider this during the game. Now keep in mind, I was also obviously on tilt after 2 losses in a row, so I was just playing sort of playing moves and trying to play the natural move without too much thinking, and that way I would try to avoid being in my head too much. So I play b4, knight d4, rook c7, a4, queen c5. He plays knight e2 here, and now I finally spot attacks with takes. Rook a3, king b1, queen a5. White's temporarily up a rook here, but I am threatening a checkmate, so if white plays a move like knight d4, I go check, and queen a2, checkmate. So the only way to stop it is to play queen b2, and now after rook b3, black should be winning here pretty easily. Sam plays knight d4, I take, I make a check, king c2, play knight b6, and now he blunders with knight b3, which allows queen a2, and he has to resign here, so if he plays king d1, he just loses the knight, and with a queen and 2 knights for 2 rooks and a bishop, black should be winning very simply. So this was a very big win. After winning this game, I believe that I was a half point out of second place. I would draw, I think I drew my next game if I'm not mistaken, against Shakram Mamedyarov. So we come to this critical 6th round game. Now at this moment, Alireza has been winning every game. He's running away with the event. He might have already even clinched first place, but I was a half point behind Maxime in the running for second place, and I felt like once again I have to win this game. If I don't win this game, I'm not getting to second place, and second is the maximum that I could achieve. It was my goal on the start of day 2 of the Blitz. So Maxime plays e4. Now I play g6 again. I'm like, you know what, if I lose the game, I lose the game, but might as well take a chance. So we got this strange modern with h3. I play c5 here, essentially trying to get back into a Sicilian. After takes, queen a5, bishop d2, queen c5. You'll notice that it's looking very much like a dragon here with the same setup. Once again, for all the people who are out there wondering about the dragon, this of course, if you look up in the night sky and you look at the constellation Draco, that is what the Sicilian dragon is based off of with this pawn formation, is the Draco constellation. So knight c3 is played, knight f6, bishop d3, castles. Very much a Sicilian here. I was very happy with this opening. a6, rook e1. I play e5 here. One thing you'll notice again is it's starting to look like all those reverse Sicilians earlier. Mind you, I have a bishop on g7, but it's the same situation with these pawns on d6, a6, e5, or d3, a3, e4, d3, a3 and b2, for example. So bishop e3, queen c7, a4, knight c6, bishop e6, bishop e3, h6 here, queen d2, king h7, guarding the pawn. Rook d1, rook d8. Now I was very upset at myself during the game because I realized as soon as I moved that rook f d8 was probably a better try. Now it's funny because the computer just laughs at me and says this wasn't right, but the reason that I was mad at myself as soon as I played rook a8 is because I felt that after a move like queen e2 here, I can put the rook on c8. Now in almost all Sicilians, you want to have a rook on the half open c file here. So as soon as I played rook a8, I was actually very upset at myself, although apparently according to the computer, rook d8, knight d5 and white's better. So what do I know? So I go rook d8, queen e2, I play rook d7 here, rook ac1, and now I go rook c8 with the idea of putting my rook on c8, although as I said before, I've wasted more tempi to do it because I've played rook a d8 to d7 and c8. So I've gone 1 2 3 as opposed to 1 and 2. At any rate, I still do get the rook to c8 here. So I get the rook to c8, knight d5, we trade, I takes with the rook, which I was very surprised by. I have to add, I was sure that Maxime would take with the pawn. Knight e7, and now I get queen c4, and there's double trouble because both the pawns on the pawns on e4 and a4 are under attack, and white cannot guard both of the pawns. So we get knight d2, queen a4, b3, queen b5, knight c4, I play d5, takes, rook d1, now I play rook c d8, and black is simply up a pawn here for nothing really. If I can simplify here, I should be winning in the long term. So Maxime plays bishop b6, we trade some pieces, I go knight d5, bishop a7, knight f4, queen f3, queen d7, bishop b8, f6, guarding the pawn on e5, which supports the knight on f4, knight d6, b5, Queen a8 is played here. I go a5, and this is a very important move because if white takes on a5, I have queen c6 threatening checkmate, and after f3 queen c2 checkmate on g2 is pretty much unstoppable. So king h2 is played by Maxime, and now I go a4, we trade. He goes c4, trying to push the c pawn up the board. Now I find knight d3, attacking f2 and stopping the c5 pawn push. Queen d5 is played. Now knight b4, queen b5, knight c6, sort of taking advantage of the fact that white cannot capture the pawn because I capture the bishop. Additionally, you can't ever really move the bishop because then you lose the knight. So white is really stuck here, and Maxime could have resigned, but he plays a few more moves. He plays knight e4, a3, bishop d6. Now I go a2, queen b2, and now I go f5, and white is going to lose either the knight on e4 or the bishop on d6 here. And so Maxime plays queen a2, f takes e4, c5, I go queen f5, king g1, knight d4, queen c4, queen f4, c6, and now I just play e3, and after pawn takes pawn with a classic fossil, I go knight f3 check, attacking the king. And when white takes the knight, I just capture the queen. So Maxime resigns after knight f3, and I move a half point ahead of him into second place. Now I would go on to win the rest of my games, and I would cross 2900 rating in Blitz. Not that really is all that relevant, but I did finish very strong with 4 wins in a row to get to second place. So I was very pleased with the result. Their first place was never realistic for me. Maybe I would say the only moment that I think it could have happened would have been on the first day in the Blitz when I would start out very strong and Alireza was losing this endgame to Fabiano Caruana. Fabiano blundered it away. He was unable to win, and I feel like after that moment there was never any chance of me winning the event. So to get to second and have the maximum result really makes me feel good about everything, especially after the first 3 days of Rapid where I played extremely poorly. So all in all, it was a good result, and I can't complain. Obviously, Alireza, very deserving winner, played extremely well in the Rapid and Blitz. It seemed like he was sharp, he was energetic, motivated, everything was going his way. So it's going to be very exciting to see how he does in the classical portion of the Sinkfield Cup, which is now occurring in St. Louis. But at any rate, this is the final recap. We're going to do the Rapid and Blitz. I would give myself probably, in terms of overall performance, I would say it was a B+ is the grade that I'm going to give myself because I felt like I played great in the Blitz, but the Rapid was certainly very far below my standards. So I would say overall I give myself a B+. So I'm happy. Could have been better in some ways. Whether I could have won, I don't think that was realistic, but I still feel like I could have played better. So that's why I have to say it's a B+. At any rate, I hope you guys have enjoyed this final recap from the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz. I know it's a few days late, but I had other things going on. But once again, if you did like this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button below, and I'll be back with some recaps, I think, of the Sinkfield Cup, which is now the classical event happening in St. Louis. I'll see you guys soon.